Good afternoon and welcome back to the Pry House Medicinal Garden here on the Antietam National Battlefield. I'm Greg Susla and I've been reconstructing this Pry House Medicinal Garden for the last 5 years. So today we're going to talk about soil testing, the soil you have in your garden before you have to plant. And first off, you have to ask yourself, well, why do you want me to soil test? Soil testing is important from the standpoint that you need to know the pH of your soil. That certain plants grow within certain pH ranges, and you need to know, is the soil in your garden amenable to that pH range? And if it's not, how do you have to amend your soil? The second thing you want to know is, what are the nutrients in that soil? And your plants need, besides oxygen and sunlight and water, they need certain nutrients in order to grow and survive. And you want to assess your soil to what's the nutrient level in that soil. So if you want to soil test, where do you start? So the first place you want to go is to the web and just put in soil testing agencies or soil testing companies and look for the areas, look what you may have in your area. Some university college of agricultures may do soil testing, if not, there's corporate soil testing agencies all around the country. Once you go and you find a soil testing company that you want to use, the first thing you're going to have to do is download a sheet which shows you how to identify your garden beds. There's demographics and things like that, your name and address, but there's also how to identify your garden beds to know what garden beds you're testing, and also what tests do you want to run. And if you look at any soil testing company, they're going to have what they call routine 1, routine 2, or routine 3 test, and you're going to pick one of those routine tests to assess what you want to assess in your land, in your soil. Typically it's pH and nutrients, and those routine tests will assess all of that. So once you have that, the next step that you have to do, as this sheet shows me, is sample identification. So we have 13 beds here in the Pry House Medicinal Garden, so I need to identify which of the 13 beds that soil sample has come from. So I take the sampling sheet and I put in row 1, bed 1. What do I have here? I have row 1, bed 1. And so the first thing, and the companies will actually give you instructions on how to sample your soils. And what you typically do, and don't be afraid when you read the company's instructions on how to test your soil, a lot of those companies work with large farms, and they talk about sampling acreages of farmland, and they talk about getting 10 to 15 to 20 samples. You don't have to do that in a garden bed this small. Now, the way we built these garden beds, all the soil and all the soil amendments are the same, and once I show you the results, you're going to see that the results of all 14 beds are pretty similar, because the way we developed our soil was the same process. So the first thing you want to do is, after you've identified your bed 1, row 1, and you've identified it on your sampling sheet, you want to have a little bag that corresponds. It says row 1, bed 1. And the company will tell you how much soil you have to get. And typically you just take a trowel. You want to use a stainless steel trowel. You don't want to use brass or something like that, which can react with the dirt and alter the samples. And you dig down about 6 inches. So you go in, go down about 6 inches. Most samples have to be about a cup of dirt. It doesn't matter if it's moist as long as it's not wet. You collect your sample, you seal it off, and this is the sample that you'll send off to the company to analyze your pH and your nutrients. And you make one of these bags for every bed that you want to sample. Now, some people will tell you that these beds are only 4 by 6 or 24 square feet. I don't have to get a lot of samples out of this bed. I just took one, and that's representative. And when I saw my results, I know that bed 1, row 1 is the same as row 2, bed 4, because everything was so similar. So once you send it in, it takes about 3 days to get your results. They'll send you an email results, and then after that, this is what your results look like. And we'll post this on the YouTube channel, and it gives you a number of things. First off, it tells you that this is the results for bed 1, row 1, the bed that we just sampled. I have all the laboratory data, so it gives me an assessment of all of my electrolytes, all of my nutrients, and you can see here, both numerically and graphically, that I have very high levels of nutrients. So the nutrient question I had about our beds is really not relevant, because I have plenty of nutrients. What's concerning is when we looked at the pH. Our pH here is 7.5, and like I said before, we'd like a pH in the range of about 6 to 7, maybe 6.5. So my pH is relatively high. We'll talk about that in a minute. The other important thing to look at is your cation exchange capacity. That just talks about the ability of the soil to hold on to positively charged electrolytes like our calcium, magnesium, potassium, aluminum, and not let them be leached out of the dirt by rainwater or things like that. Our CEC is 22.9 or 23. Well, what does that mean? What's a normal CEC or cation exchange capacity? Depending on where you live in the country, so if we were to go to the eastern shore, which is relatively sandy, that the electrolytes are leached quite readily with rainwater and just through nature. A normal range on the eastern shore is about 2 MEQs per 100 grams. If you go from the coastal region to kind of like Montgomery County or Howard County, Maryland, that's the Piedmont region. A normal CEC is about 5. We're kind of 2 provinces to the left. We're in the Valley Ridge region, and because we have a more clay soil, we're probably at least 5, maybe between 5 and 10 MEQs per 100 grams of soil. And the fact that we're 23, I think our CEC is relatively normal for the soil that we have here in Keedysville, Maryland. The other thing I want to look at is called base saturation. And what base saturation tells me is out of those 23 MEQs per 100 grams of dirt, this is the percentage that those electrolytes make up of that 23 MEQs. So for potassium, they comprise 2.5% of the 23. Calcium, about 66% of that 23. So that's the percentage of each of these individual electrolytes that make up our CEC. So, and that just tells you the CEC is the ability of the soil to hold on to electrolytes so they're not leached out with rainwater or the like. So those numbers actually look pretty good, and actually it's relatively high. But let's go back to our pH. Again, our pH is high. So why would our pH be high? Why would our pH be, if soil is normally acidic in Maryland, why would I have a pH that's relatively basic? Well, there's a couple of reasons. First, nature, which nature probably hasn't had a great impact here, or else it's man-made. Man-made, commonly for elevated pH, that would be like over-liming. If you actually had an acidic field and the farmer actually went out and applied lime to the field and over-limed, provide too much base, then the pH would go up. I think the reason we have a high pH here, if you go back to our CEC, we have a lot of calcium. I use well water to water the garden, and I think the well water may have a high calcium content, and that's the cause for my high calcium in my CEC, and that's the cause for my high pH, or my alkaline pH. Okay, so what do I need to do now? I've got this high pH, I've got to remediate it, I've got to do something to lower that pH to the normal range. Well, one of the things that these soil companies will tell you is they will give you guidance how to reduce the pH. So in this lab fact, this is called reducing soil pH with elemental sulfur. So if I want to lower the pH, I can use chemicals like sulfur, ammonium sulfate, or aluminum sulfate. And so where do I start? Well, here on the left-hand side, I have my initial pH, about 7.5. Where would I like to go? I'd like to go down into the 6s. So here I have a pH 6. And then it asks me what type of soil do I have. I have sandy, loamy, or clay. Well, I know here with these amended beds, I have a loamy soil. So what this is telling me, if I want to drop my initial pH of 7.5 to a pH in the 6 range, I need to add 29 pounds per 1,000 square feet of soil. Well, I don't have 1,000 square feet of soil, I have 24 square feet of soil. So if I do the multiplication factor, I actually need about 0.7 pounds per each bed of sulfur to raise my pH into the 6 to 7 range. So the first thing I'm going to do is, in order to raise the pH, is stop using well water to water the gardens. Take away the source that caused the increase in the pH. Secondly, this winter, I'm going to lay sulfur at about 1/2 to maybe 3/4 of a pound per bed over the winter time. let the winter snows dissolve that sulfur and melt it into the beds. And next spring I'll come back and I'll assess the beds again to see what the pH range is and if it's in the normal range. The reason I want to get it into the normal range, if you're out of the range for most of the plants, although I have a lot of nutrients, the plants may not be able to use the nutrients because it's not the beds aren't in an optimal pH range. So there we go, soil testing. Test your soil. Again, if you're going to start a garden, make sure your soil pH and soil nutrients are appropriate for the plants you want to grow. Amend your soil as appropriate, retest the following season, and your garden should thrive, be it a vegetable or an ornamental garden. Have a good day, and thanks for stopping by the Prairie House Medicinal Garden.